Trinidadians have been living under vaccine mandates like the rest of the world for a long time. And that, for example, includes childhood vaccinations, what we refer to as the childhood program of immunizations. You have a series of immunizations that you get against significant childhood diseases, and you cannot enter school without those vaccines.
Yes, because
that is a mandate.
Yes, because there's actually part of the discussions, people obviously realize we have had vaccines before, so it's not something new and to have mandates. So
it's not new at all. It's all what they've been, as soon as vaccines were discovered. The first vaccine discovered was way back in 1793 for smallpox, using a cowpox scraping. So Trinidad, like everywhere else, Trinidad and Tobago, has many, many vaccine rules and regulations. You can't even go to university without showing your vaccine cards. And you certainly can't travel without, say, a yellow fever vaccine if you come from Trinidad, because Trinidad, of course, has what we call endemic yellow fever. Okay, so that's just a couple of examples of the fact that we've always not only had vaccine mandates, but we've relied on vaccines in public health to reduce the risk of significant diseases, particularly diseases of childhood. Having said that, I think Trinis are not as attuned to what we call stages of life vaccines. We have a huge number of vaccines that as you go through life, particularly as you get to over 65, that we recommend as medical providers. And I think that is less, should we say, at the front of mind for Trinis. There are many, many doctors who practice exactly what we call best practice. So for example, if you're over 60, you should have gotten the shingles vaccine, you should have gotten the pneumococcus vaccine to prevent pneumonia, and you should be getting an annual flu vaccine, okay? Just 3 examples. But that has never been, I would say, part of a government mandate, or it hasn't been part of a government campaign. Certainly I know, because I have family in Trinidad, that you can actually get all those vaccines by going to the health center, all of them.
Nice. So unlike those vaccines, I think some people are concerned about the speed at which the COVID-19.
Well, we'll talk about that right now. So keep in mind that the process of making vaccines, like every other pharmaceutical product, it happens, the so-called point of discovery, then it has to be manufactured, and then it has to be used. So it has to be built into existing health service delivery, okay? And so one of the reasons that I think that everyone in the Caribbean and most of Africa, all over Asia and Latin America, they're very comfortable with childhood vaccines, but they're less educated about adult vaccines, okay? So let's talk about the coronavirus vaccines. Keep in mind that coronaviruses have been around for quite a long time. We discovered coronaviruses in the 60s, okay? But the 2 that we are most concerned with, SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, are relatively more recently discovered, along with many other viruses that come about because of what we call animal-human interaction, okay? And animal-human interaction has been increasing because of the growing population of the earth, the growing development of countries, etc. So every year when we have a new flu vaccine, the reason we have a new flu vaccine is that there's been recombination going on in wild influenza viruses, and that means that change is happening, and the old vaccine may not work against the new variants of flu, okay? It's very similar now to coronaviruses. So we said we've known about coronaviruses since 1966. We had an outbreak of SARS-CoV-1 in 2003, killed about 8,000 people, affected about 36 countries, but eventually disappeared. And that's because it was not efficient at transmission. So once you detected the cases, isolated the cases, the natural cycle of transmission disappeared. Okay, and this is one of the reasons for the speed of coming up with current coronaviruses. The week after WHO declared that there was a new potential threat in January of 2020 from this SARS-CoV-2, the sequence was uploaded and everyone was able to see it was a typical coronavirus. Okay, and that's how work on mRNA, which has been going on for the last 20 years, we were trying to find an mRNA vaccine against the common cold, influenza, and other diseases. But the technology existed. For example, I worked at the National Institutes of Health for many years. That's where that technology was invented. So it simply says, if I know the sequence of the DNA or RNA of a virus, I can make a vaccine to that without having to go and grow the virus, which is what we used to have to do in the past, okay? And so mRNA technology met SARS-CoV-2 very early in the pandemic. That is how we have effective vaccines today.
Nice. So
in addition, hold on 1 second. In addition to the available technology, they also required huge investment. So the United States government spent about $12 billion investing in many different companies to say, you have mRNA technology. There were two major ones. That was Moderna and Pfizer. You make those vaccines. They also invested in other types of vaccines, not mRNA vaccines, like Johnson & Johnson, which is what we call a vectored vaccine. You use a carrier virus to deliver some of the viral RNA, okay? And then you have what we call whole killed attenuated vaccines, like the Indian vaccine and the Russian vaccine and Sinovac and Sinopharm. These are whole killed coronavirus vaccines, okay? So investment went on in all different types of what we call technology platforms to come up quickly with the most efficacious vaccines that we had. So ask your question now and I'll come back.
How can health officials around the world, more specifically in Trinidad, break down that information and disseminate it in a way that will make people feel comfortable to get vaccinated, especially those who don't understand the science that you just explained?
So, you know, I've been saying this for quite a while, giving people scientific information, giving them epidemiological information will get conveyed to a big chunk of the population that has the ability to even understand the words that you are saying and to integrate that information. And I think there's a big chunk, depending on the country and the society, a big chunk that will not be able to respond to that kind of scientific information. And I alluded to this in our last call, where the health-seeking behavior, you can put health-seeking behavior in many populations into various buckets, okay? So when I say that there's a chunk of the population that will be able to respond to the scientific information, these are people who have the ability to, already have an existing framework to incorporate that information, okay? They understand what the virus is, and they may know what the term antibody is, and they may know what a vaccine is. But there's a big chunk of people who don't, who can't. And they have to find, so I always say you have to find a different set of words for different groups of people. They should be all internally consistent. And you should be able to graduate up to the amount of scientific information you're giving. But for many people, they need very clear, simple information. The vaccines are safe. The vaccines are being used all over the world. The vaccines have a benefit, which is to reduce hospitalization rates and reduce severe disease. They do a not as good job of preventing transmission, okay? But they bring a huge societal benefit by reducing the number of people who become sick. So you really have to do your homework. I think in Trinidad, we've relied too much on the government standing up and giving information. And if you do that every day, guess what happens? People stop listening. They stop listening. So you have to find, it's a standard communications 101, different messages for different groups, but internally consistent messages, different channels of communication. And, you know, the prime minister standing up and the chief medical officer standing up and giving information, that loses its efficacy very quickly. And we've had that for 2.5 years. And so we've been advocating for more private sector communications groups to get involved. Some of the work that, for example, has been done by the Guardian Media Limited in putting out videos. I was part of one of those called A Dose of Hope, trying to explain exactly what we're talking about here, but also to find channels that reach young people, that reach, you know, Trinidad is a very densely cultural place. So there are lots of people who are artists and musicians and performers, and you have to be able to reach those folks. And you have to be able to reach older people who may not be as tech savvy as the young people, because these are all groups that you want to reach. So remember, I used a word early on that says a portfolio strategy or a combination strategy. This applies to vaccines as it does to all of what we call prevention or mitigation. You have to have a portfolio strategy that says, I'm going to reach this group of people with these messages. I'm going to reach these groups with these messages, and all of it has to be coordinated. And so you really need a whole of society approach. The government alone cannot do it, okay? And so when you have combinations or portfolios working together, you get a much better impact in public health, okay? Combinations are always better than single approaches. Now, I think because of the nature of the vaccines, a lot of people were mistakenly under the assumption that once you have a vaccine, everything's great. You know, I can take my mask off, I can go party, I can, you know, just drop my guard. But that is just not the case. Because for this virus, we are learning as we go, okay? And what we realize is that all of the vaccines have two disadvantages. One is, of course, they have to be given by injection. You know, a lot of people don't like injections, okay? And a lot of Trini men faint when they get an injection, a lot. So, by the way, there's another issue where women are always much better at understanding public health risk. Why that is, not so sure, but we can talk about it, okay? So the second disadvantage of the vaccines are that and this was said at the very beginning, we don't know how long the effect will last. And now we have much better information 2.5 years in, and we know that the durability of the impact is relatively short, okay? But by giving boosters, you bring the immune response back up. So, you know, boosters for the rest of your life against coronavirus is not a viable public health strategy, okay? But at the moment, that is the only strategy. So we have, I see you have a question. Okay, so not only do you have to have the ability to increase uptake, because Trinidad is stuck, okay? I think it's showing a little bit of more uptake right now, but like many countries, you get to like half the population and you're stuck. And then you have to really work hard to find those channels and those platforms to reach more people. With the Omicron variant and with the high numbers in Trinidad of deaths and hospitalizations, I think that we now have a second wave of uptake for both the vaccines, the initial dose. So I'm sorry, the initial course. So the initial course is 2 shots, okay? But by getting boosters, you update your course, okay? So keep in mind that full vaccination for these vaccines, is still 2 shots, okay? But you have to get a booster within 6 months minimum, and that updates your course, okay? So when we talk about full vaccination, you know exactly what that means. When you talk about updated vaccination, you know what that means, okay? So going back to the notion of how do we keep getting the benefit from vaccines? We have to be able to get more people to complete their course, which is 2 shots. And then we have to have a strategy for people to come and get their boosters, okay? Now, that means, and that is way lower than the half of the population that currently is fully vaccinated. How do we do that? Well, you have to have another communication campaign for people to understand the need to come and get a booster and to make it happen, get up and go. I think in Trinidad, it's relatively easy to walk in and get a vaccine. It is easy compared to some places, okay? And so why is it that we still only, we probably have like a 20% booster rate for the people who got a full course? We need to do something about that. And we also need to be straight with people. Vaccines alone are not the answer. So even though you can say to people, well, we'll have safe zones where only vaccinated people can enter, you still have to practice mitigation. Because yes, we know that people who are fully vaccinated can still get infected, less often, but can still, and they can transmit it. Okay. So when you talk about a combination strategy, we should never ask people to believe that getting vaccinated ends their commitment to all of the other measures. And also what I think people have not in Trinidad used as a communication strategy is understanding or helping people to understand what is a risk management approach for me as an individual. I tell people here, your daily risk management approach is to understand that once you step out of your house, assuming that strangers aren't coming into your house every day, once you step out of your house, you will have risks in all of the activities that you have to partake in. And you have to choose a strategy that says, okay, if I'm going to the grocery today, well, I won't go and do the other thing. So you calibrate your risk, particularly with high transmission, as we have in Trinidad, and you say, well, I'm fully vaccinated, but I'm still going to be wearing my mask. I'm still going to be practicing social distancing. Luckily, you have great weather in Trinidad, so you can do outdoor things, right?
Nice. So,
I'm sitting here below freezing in Washington, D.C. Doing outdoor things is a bit difficult. When you help people to say, what is my personal risk management strategy, they do better at really making these health decisions. I'll shut up for a sec so you can.
No, that's all fine. You're given very valuable information. So at this stage, we have discussed the pandemic, the response to vaccination. So we have a few minutes left, and I'd love to use that to discuss the way forward and your thoughts as an epidemiologist.
We are in year 2.5 of this pandemic, okay? Or the third year, let's put it that way. That means we have a lot of COVID fatigue, a lot. And it's at every level. And we have a lot of what I call downstream effects. If you think about supply chain not being able to get things, that's because the downstream effect from the disruption caused by the pandemic, not the medical outcomes, but the disruption, because people can't go to work, because everything is turned on its head, they can't travel. Travel is delayed for supply chain like ships and planes, and all of that makes people feel that they're under siege, okay? And they have to be reassured that one day we're going to come out of this. Okay. And we will come out of this.
And is there any specific year or any specific,
No,
could it be vaccination to
although,
take us out to a dominant strain that is less
well, that's what
like
Omicron is.
Omicron? Right.
Yeah. So I think these are all reasonable thoughts, but I think most of us are very afraid to put any time limits on this, given how it's been going. You know, most of the change that we've seen in coronavirus, the reason we have new variants is because we have lots of transmission. And why do we have lots of transmission? Because not everyone uptakes the messages of prevention. Okay, so we have to keep trying. We can't give up. So you need a message that one day we are going to get out of this. Until then, until we have real evidence that we're heading in that direction, we have to respond as we did the day one of the pandemic,
Right.
which is to protect people who are vulnerable, more likely to die. And we already said last time that Trinidad seems to, the outcomes look like a much older, sicker population. And that's something that Trinidad has to take into account. Why is it that the outcomes look like an older, sicker population? What are the reasons?
Nice.
You know, we talk about comorbidities, but that is not it alone. Okay.
Nice. So my last question, I guess, is what should we learn from this pandemic and put in place for future pandemics, especially in terms of like a global response?
Well, I'll tell you, Tyrell, that today, as we are speaking, we do not have a global plan for coronavirus control. There's been what I call a breakdown in multilateral commitments to public health. And it seems that what the coronavirus pandemic, because of its sheer scale, its globalness, it really caused countries to give up on their multilateral commitments, to not approach this as a global problem, which it is, and to hunker down and say we can only protect those within our borders. Now, in some respects, you need countries to do that, but you also need to have something beyond that. Okay. And so I think the breakdown in multilateral relations around this pandemic is something that we have to acknowledge. And we have to say, yes, in order to truly come out of this and plan for the future, we need a much stronger, much more meaty global commitment to preventing pandemics in the future. And every country has to step up. We also need leadership. And so that is something where you could say, well, the WHO has failed in its leadership, but the WHO is a very small agency, I have to tell you, okay? They don't have the power to commandeer governments. They don't. They advise governments, and they collect information, and they issue technical guidance. The breakdown in coronavirus is not technical. In fact, technical has done really well, like making vaccines, making drugs, understanding how the virus works, understanding how the body's response works. All of that is fantastic. However, where we failed miserably is in the political and the social, and often the economic. And that is the realm of government and the realm of citizen engagement with government. And I think that one of the big issues for coronavirus, and certainly will be again in the future, is that the sort of contract between government and people is in a place where it was never before because of social media, because we have sold the notion, well, not when I say we, I'm talking about economies, have sold the notion that health is some individualistic search, to look the best you can, feel the best you can, live as long as you can, etc. But in fact, health is not just an individual effort. The health of the public is a collective effort. And that's, again, where a lot of people don't seem to understand that public health principles and treating an individual patient are related, but they're very much not the same thing.